Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Brutally Honest podcast. I am your host, Kathryn Ducey, and I'm so grateful to be here today, and I'm so grateful for you for tuning in and listening. I would not be here if it weren't for you and for choosing to take, a moment out of your day and intentionally listen to this episode for whatever reason. I don't take a single of that for granted, and I want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I'm very grateful for you, and thank you. Now, if you haven't listened to the first episode of the Brutally Honest podcast, I suggest you go back and take a listen because it is part one of my story. Today's going to be part two. So it's basically from the age of 23 till today that I'm going to share about. I'm 43, so I split it into two. I just divided it in half. All right. And you're going to notice, a couple of themes that are playing out. And that is that there was chaos and dysfunction growing up in my home. And that energy continued to be perpetuated and perpetuate itself throughout my life until I woke up to it and realized that this is what was happening. And I'm still working through some of this, my friends. And it is about a decade now that I've been doing this work. It's been 11 years. That isn't to scare you or to have you fear, stepping into the work if you haven't already, or to say like, wow, listen to me, I'm so amazing. It's more just to give you some perspective, okay? I'm no more ahead than anybody else. I'm exactly where I need to be, and so are all of you. Couple of reminders. It is not only the home that you grew up in that shapes who you are. We call that nurture. It is also the soul that chose to embody your human body, right? That came with certain attributes. Okay, so there are two aspects that I want you to be thinking about as you're listening to this episode and any episode that you ever listen to on the Brutally Honest podcast. And that is that your soul chose your parents, it chose your body, okay, it chose this lifetime to complete some specific tasks. And some souls need to complete some more difficult tasks than others. And it's not a competition, but mine definitely did in this lifetime. All right. And boy, am I ever grateful for that. But it has been one heck of a ride, let me tell you. And you're getting all the front row access to all of that, right? So your soul chose you, your body, your parents, etc. And then also most of who you became was imprinted on you by your parents. You become a product of your parents and what's going on, how they're relating to you, the shapes that they're taking with their body, what they think about the world, themselves, other people. That all gets baked into you by the age of 7, my friends. How you relate to money gets imprinted on you before the age of 7. Most people will be shocked to learn that. And as you listen to these episodes and as you listen to this podcast, I will be sharing a lot of psychology, anthropology, behavioral science. This is all my practice. This is all the information that I have, the research that I've done over the past decade. And I also studied anthropology actually in university, which I talked about university in our first episode. I ended up cheating my way through it, faking a learning disability. A lot of cheating and lying. Cheating and lying has actually been a theme of my life. And it's not because I'm a bad person, right? You think about if your kids lie, it's not that they're bad. There's something else going on beneath the surface. And I grew up feeling very unsafe. Just to summarize a little bit of the first episode, I grew up in a home where I felt unsafe. I didn't feel like I could rely on my parents emotionally or mentally or physically, really. The message I got from a really young age was, you're on your own, kiddo. My mother actually says that all the time. You're on your own, kiddo. And at the time, I just thought like everybody's parents probably say that. But that had more to do with my mom feeling really hurt and really wounded from her childhood and trying to sort of create some distance with me, right? So you're on your own, kiddo was really herself saying that to herself when she was a kid. I'm on my own. Right? This is it. And I'm sure her mom and dad probably said the same or something similar to her. In summary, I learned from a very young age that really I had to will myself through life. And I learned a couple of ways, strategies to take care of myself, right? To survive, because I couldn't properly attach to both my parents. Two things in particular, which we'll talk about in later episodes. If you've ever studied the 5 personality patterns, this is something that I've studied at length for over 5 years. I've taught this to all my clients. It's something that I'm rereading. I'm rereading the book again now that I'm a new mom. And basically what it does is it shows us there's 5 ways that they've identified that human beings create safety when they're not feeling safe, because all of us are trying to create safety 100% of the time. And then we come up with a couple of ways in childhood that helps us create safety. And over time, these become habits, and then they become basically our personality. And the funny thing is, interesting thing is, we think this is who we are, but it's actually not. And these, few ways that we learn to create safety actually become what ends up holding us back in relationships, when it comes to career, when it comes to money, health, the whole thing, intimacy. So this is something you're going to want to probably research for yourself, and you'll learn a little bit about it on this podcast episode, on others. But the 2 ways that I leaned into when I wasn't feeling safe to help me survive were the rigid pattern and the aggressive pattern. Okay, so you're going to see these 2 things woven throughout a lot of my life story. With the rigid pattern, what that looks like is the rules come before connection. As a way to create safety for myself and keep myself contained, I have a lot of rules that I follow and that I expect other people to follow, which is so funny because I'm such a rule breaker. Often I've broken a lot of rules, which is kind of a little bit more about the aggressive pattern. But I will definitely have a bunch of rules for people to follow, or like my partner to follow, or the kids to follow if I'm feeling unsafe. And so long as you follow those rules, then you can connect with me, right? But it's still from a distance. And I'm working on that with my kids and my partner for sure, and have come a long way, okay? But a lot of people who are kind of like, really tidy, they keep a really tidy home. They're like very busy. We're very busy people. We're always doing busy work because it prevents us from having to stop and feel, or maybe stop and connect with our kids or our spouse or whomever, a partner, people in our lives that we love. Okay. And the shape that it takes, like in my body, is you can imagine a rigid person. Like we're just kind of straight. There's not a lot of like flow to our body. Basically the flow, the energy is cut off. We lean more into performing. We're performance artists. Okay. Many of us do not enjoy sex because it's all about performing, right? It's not about love or connection or being in the moment. That's important to note. That's been a huge theme of my life. And we're totally disconnected from our internal GPS and our internal compass. We basically look outside of ourselves for, what we're supposed to do. We tend to follow the crowd and follow authority. So rigid pattern is one way that I adopted to stay safe. And that's another theme you're going to see woven through the stories that I'll tell you on this podcast. And then the other theme is the aggressive pattern. Okay. So this pattern is more about posturing and getting big when you feel threatened, when you feel triggered, when you feel whatever it is, afraid, competitive. So when my little detector goes off saying, uh-oh, something's wrong, right? I'm feeling a bunch of feelings. I will get kind of mean. I can get kind of mean, which isn't who I am. It's just a pattern that I took on as a kid and that I still am working through, but I've worked through a lot of it now. And it's a way of staying safe. And so I can get kind of mean. I can get kind of dominant. I can get kind of pushy, arrogant. I can sometimes even get physical. Okay. Physical meaning, I remember like early on in one of my first relationships, like I punched a boyfriend in the arm because I was mad at him. And he was like, don't ever do that again. And I was like, oh my God, I can't even believe I just did that. You know what I mean? So it can take that kind of shape, but not always. All right. So you're going to see these themes woven throughout my story. And there's a couple of other personality safety patterns that people develop. Usually you have a primary and a secondary. Okay. And what has you take on one of the 5 or 2 of the 5 is that your soul has a predisposition to those when it comes earth side. Okay. So my soul clearly was a better fighter than other souls. So other souls may have tried the aggressive pattern or the rigid pattern, but it didn't work. They couldn't outpower other people, the way that I probably could, which I'm not bragging about. Saying these things is kind of interesting. It's fascinating, all this stuff. So then they would go and they would try other strategies. There's 3 others, and those ones tend to be more of the submissive, the more people-pleasy patterns, right? The sort of endure or hunker down, okay? Versus posturing, getting bigger, dominating, etc. So a bunch of different themes here, which is helpful to summarize what the first episode was really about. And so we start this episode at the age of 24. I had just left a relationship after 5 or 6 years that was, for all intents and purposes, an amazing relationship. It was definitely leading to marriage. My pattern, right, was that people can't get close to me because I couldn't get close to my parents. Any sign of, this is going somewhere and there's going to be a lot of closeness would be like a for me. And I would start to sabotage it. So I left this relationship that was actually quite good, but I had all these reasons for why it wasn't. And by the way, none of those reasons were because of me for a long time. That's typical. You blame others. You're in this victim mode. It got boring and I don't know, I just wasn't attracted to him anymore. It makes a lot of sense, right? I could attach to him. I wasn't used to that. In order for me to almost get off, right? I don't know if you've ever read the book Existential Kink. We're all just getting off on stuff all the time. It's fascinating. You got to read that book if you haven't. Highly recommend. Most of my clients do. But in order for me to get off, I needed a little bit more chaos, a little bit more dysfunction, right? I needed to be angry more. We very rarely fought. So I end that relationship and I end up having a really quick couple of weeks with someone after that, ran into the arms of someone new. That was a theme of mine, actually. That became a theme of mine. Into someone else's arms, and all the same issues came up. But I was only with him for a couple of weeks, and then I decided that I was actually going to take a break from dating totally, fully. And the interesting thing, and I haven't really shared this with many people, was that one of the things that I was pondering and contemplating at that time was whether or not I was actually more interested in women than I was in men. I never really felt connected during intimacy with a partner. At this point, I was 24 and probably 25 more. And, I'd been intimate with people since I was probably 16. The first time I had sex was when I was 18 with a very loving partner who I'd been with for a year. And we broke up, I think, a year later. I dated some really, really good guys out of the gate, guys. And then things got a little sketchy. Your girl started making some interesting choices, right? And again, it happened for me. This was all very intentional on my part, but unconscious at the time, right? Just perpetuating that there was something wrong with me and that I was bad. So I had a lot of trouble letting people get close to me, which we're talking about, but I also didn't enjoy sex at all. And so I started to wonder if maybe it was because I was interested more in women, right? And now that will be the case for a lot of people. Yes, you are more interested in someone of the same sex than you are of the opposite sex. But now that I've done, decades of this work and I've really looked back and I've really thought about what it was, for me, I've always been very performative. There's that rigid pattern, right? So I was very performative in sex. It was all about a means to an end. And it never felt good. It was never about pleasure for me. It was about just performing. And I would do things that didn't feel good, and I was never in my body. I left my body every time. And so, of course, sex would not be enjoyable. It was never about love or the connection. It was almost like you have to brush your teeth every day. So you do. Do you enjoy brushing your teeth? Probably not. It's not terrible, but it's like you don't even realize what you're doing. It's not even a big deal. That was sex for me. Okay. So I went through a period of wondering if maybe I was interested in women. And that became a theme for me for a while, like years and years and years. I still wondered because I still couldn't figure out why anybody would ever have sex and why it mattered, honestly. Also because I couldn't get close to my parents. Well, think about how close sex is, right? It's way too intimate for me, way too vulnerable, right? So now you can kind of see, some of you might even be experiencing that and you wondered maybe it is, I'm not interested in the same sex. Maybe it's because I have some trauma from childhood, could be a possibility. Maybe you want to take a look at that. So I stayed single for a while, and I think this episode is going to be about relationships, but also about career. And I really started to focus on my career. So I'd gotten into advertising. So as someone who grew up in a family where I wasn't allowed to be separate, meaning whatever my parents' values, thoughts, beliefs, attitudes were, right? Desires, interests, I had to adapt those as well in order to stay connected to them. If there was any sense of me being different, it was very triggering for them. Makes sense. Emotionally mature parents, fragile internal world, a kid comes along, is challenging them. They're going to go one of two ways. They're either going to support the child in that pursuit of, their own selves, own identity, staying connected to themselves, or they're going to try and put that fire out, right? They're going to try and repress it, suppress it because it's too painful for them, right? It's too challenging for them. Most people who are emotionally immature need they need other people to be in agreement with them. They can't handle the possibility of there's more than one way to look at the world because that just shatters their internal world, right? A lot of this stuff is ego work as well. We do a lot of ego work with my clients. It's such an important piece of the work, guys. Oh my God. And Freud and your identity and all that stuff. I won't get too much into that today. But basically, I emerged out of childhood becoming like a little mini me of my parents. I was totally disconnected from my true self. And so I followed along in much of their, footsteps. They had a really beautiful store actually when I was a kid. It was the very first of its kind, a fish retail store. They loved it and they really thrived in this business. And then once that closed down after about a decade or so, they both sort of gave up on themselves and started to work for other people in other companies. And I wouldn't say that they were so passionate about it, or if there was some passion, they were still undermining, just how brilliant they were and how smart they were. And, they could probably make a lot more money, but they just wouldn't. My mother wouldn't ask for more money. I know my mom struggled financially and never really made what she was worth and became an executive assistant and all this stuff. So I watched them have this beautiful entrepreneurial journey, which I'm now on, but I also watched them work in jobs that they didn't love. And so that was what I did. After university, I just got a job in advertising. Now, it wasn't all terrible. It was like the heyday of advertising. So this would have been around the year of like 2002. And I mean, there were massive budgets at the time if you were around during that era. People had a lot more money. Brands had a lot more money. Companies had a lot more money. We had a lot of money as a company. I was working for a company called Alliance Atlantis in television and broadcast. And I got put there by a temp agency. I went to a temp agency and was like, find a job for me. Isn't that hilarious? Always looking outside of myself for the answers, right? Or an authority to tell me what to frickin' do. You tell me where I should work. But it did end up opening up a door for me that was very, very important. And I really loved the people there. I loved working there because of the people. But I didn't like my job. I wasn't connected to it at all, in the least. And it wasn't where I was going to be going. I don't consume any advertising, like personally. I don't look at billboards. I don't watch TV. Okay, so it was like probably one of the worst places for me to be. It's like a social media manager who doesn't have Instagram. It's weird, right? Or like watch YouTube or know what TikTok is. So great place, wrong fit. But either way, it was a great experience for me. I was making pretty good money. Like really good money. I had a really high salary compared to what some of my friends were getting out of university. And I think that just goes to show that there was a lot going on internally for me, but people saw a lot of potential in me. And I am someone who's very trustworthy. I am someone who carries themselves well. So I really take credit where credit is due. All right, so I'm working in advertising. Advertising also happens to be a really fun industry. Okay. A lot of drinking. Like we would go for boozy lunches all the time. Alcohol has played a big role in my life. It has been something that I have turned to when I was feeling some big feelings. It has been a way to numb out and escape my life. I watched my parents drink every day and they still do. My mom still drinks a glass of wine every day, right? So it was just so normal for me to drink. And I started doing that. I started drinking probably at the age, probably grade 9. I was probably like 14. But like really drinking, I would get pretty drunk in high school, but not very often. But like I started drinking a lot in my 20s, every day for sure. And then in my 30s, I started drinking at home alone. That was interesting too. Never to the point where I was really, really drunk or, an alcoholic, but definitely using it as a crutch. So there was a lot of drinking involved in this industry, in advertising. Holy jeez. Now, towards the end of my 30s, I took like a hiatus from dating for like a couple of years, and then I met someone, and this was one of the biggest teachers for me by far. Also one of the most toxic relationships I have ever been in, besides the one that I am in with myself or have been in myself, right? It's always just a mirror, right? What you see on the outside is what's on the inside, right? So it was a very toxic relationship. And what I mean by that is we were both deeply insecure, super insecure. And we were taking that out on each other. There was a lot of alcohol involved, a lot of drugs, lying, cheating. I caught him cheating on me, which I'll never forget. It was like through a text or something. And that's not funny. At the time, it was completely devastating. And I never thought I would really get through that, although he denied it, by the way. Whew. And there was just a lot of fighting, a lot of trying to make each other jealous. There was a lot of this, okay? It was a really messed up relationship. And it said a lot about me. Now, when I say I'm messed up, I don't mean I am, like, as a person messed up. It meant that my systems internally were messed up, right? So my mindset, it was just a little bit jumbled, right? My nervous system jumbled. So he was just a reflection of all of that. I myself am not messed up. And I hope that these reframes help for you guys. So that was an interesting relationship. I think that went on for 2 years. We tried to break up several times, but insecure people tend to not be able to handle the feelings that arise once you break up with someone. One of those is like, I can't trust myself. Most of us don't trust ourselves, right? So it's like, did I make the right move? So we're not sure if we can trust ourselves. Also, that if it is the right move, how come it hurts so bad? Right? So that was a huge theme. Like, oh my God, how come this is so painful? I must have made a mistake. So I went back and forth with this guy a lot until one day he kind of moved on. And that's kind of been the theme for me. I'll break up with someone or they'll break up with me, and then we'll keep going back and forth until they end up meeting someone new. Yeah, a lot of abandonment and rejection stuff there, guys, from when I was a little girl. So now I'm about 30, and career-wise, I'm still in advertising. It's very rare that you stay in the same job out of university, but I think I was with Alliance Atlantis for I don't even know, 5-6 years. That was a neat start for me, for sure, and I was really proud of that, and I sort of wore that like a badge of honor, like I'd done something right, And then I had this epiphany one day that I'm really good with people. We had different teams, right? So I was on the sales team, and then I was on the project management team, and we had all these different teams, and I realized that all of those teams would be hiring at different times, right? Because maybe I would probably notice that like an internal or a job would be posted internally first. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I want to go for that. But then I started to get interested about the way that the job postings were written. I started to get interested about the candidate journey and like who was coming in and how they were doing the hiring. Basically, I was like, can I help these teams recruit? It became something I was really excited about. And at the time I mentioned it to one of my bosses, and she was like, I don't know, like, is this really like what you want to do, who you are, And the conversation didn't feel as supportive as I had hoped for. She probably didn't want to lose me, frankly. What I'm thinking now is she just didn't want to lose me. So instead, I decided that I was going to go and start to interview myself at different recruitment agencies. Okay. So remember, like, this is kind of like this podcast right now. I'm starting out from zero. I've never done a podcast before. I've got great experience. I've got lots of things to share. I've got lots of things to teach, I've got an amazing network, but I've never hosted a show. I've never, marketed a show. Yeah, I've never done anything like this. So I know that you can figure it out and you just have to start. So I was like, I've never been a recruiter, but I had this internal desire like I had for the podcast. And so I went out and started literally knocking on agency doors, recruitment agencies, and was like, if you take a chance on me, I think you're going to be really pleasantly surprised. I'd be a great recruiter. I went to like 10 agencies, and there was one in particular that stood out. It was called the Sales Talent Agency, run by two really, really talented people, Jamie Scarborough and Sonia Meloff at the time, actually still. And they were fantastic. He was awesome. He actually had me do an assignment. And he asked me to put together a proposal in terms of how I would work through this search if I were to do it, take it on, if it was mine. And guys, honestly, it seemed super obvious what you would do, okay? How you would leverage LinkedIn, what you would look for, how you would match up their stuff to what the job description was, how you'd get them on the phone, how you would engage with them, the questions you'd ask them. It all seemed super obvious to me. Or how you would look for similar qualities or like an up-and-comer, okay? That skill set doesn't live in everybody. So when I presented it to him, he said, "This is terrific. We're not really hiring, but I'd like to talk to my partner right now because I think he'd be a great fit." And there you had it. I got an offer for a job. I shifted out of advertising and into recruitment. This was my early 30s. What's interesting is I accepted a position where I was going to be 100% commission. Okay, so I went from a regular paycheck, biweekly paycheck, to 100% commission. So I no longer was going to have money to rely on, like that it was going to be coming in, often. And we'll get into finances in another episode, but this was very interesting because 100% commission is really smart, right? It works. It works for the right people. And there's no freaking cap, no ceiling, and you can make a ton of money. But if you're not able to manage your money, and if you have a strained relationship to money, and if you don't already have savings, I wouldn't fully recommend doing this, which was my case, by the way. Okay. So wild, wild west over here when it comes to the finances, always putting myself in like these precarious situations where I was living in fight mode, like having to will my way and find strength to make things work. Okay. Very, very familiar from when I was a little girl. So anyway, my career as a recruiter was really wonderful. I was very passionate about it. I did very well. I rose up the leaderboard fairly quickly. And I worked at that agency for, I don't even know, like a year and a half or something. And then I went to executive headhunting into a firm that was really well respected and where you're working on some very intense searches, looking for a CEO or a CFO or a CTO, it's executive. So it's the higher tier roles in companies. Now, the funny thing about this job, which lasted only 11 months, was that I was terrified of the man who owned it. Okay. So his name, I don't mind mentioning his name, was Marty Parker. And Marty had a history, right? He had a reputation for being a little bit of, I don't know, what do people want to call him? A little bit of a jerk, a little bit of an asshole, okay? A little bit of a narcissist, I think was some of the words that were getting thrown around. And I'm not going to say whether or not those titles or those names are real and whether I think that he is that. Considering my interactions with him, there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. I often felt very belittled. I felt invisible. I felt like there was a lot of authoritarian leadership going on. I felt like I had to comply. I felt like I was never good enough. Okay. Now, the flip side is that it just mirrored my whole childhood. Okay. So do you see the pattern? You just keep finding environments and people that are like your parents. Okay. So that was very much like my father. Right. And so it's just perpetuating the whole thing. I ended up getting out of there 11 months into the role. I was so stressed, guys, really, really anxious, like sick, not well. Okay. And I've since heard that a lot of people have felt that way there and didn't thrive there. So he has this way of picking out some people out of the lineup when he's hiring that he probably can see that they're going to submit, right? More than they're going to try and dominate. And I definitely was that person. Anybody I worked with was the same way. So that's kind of how that works, right? From there, I went to another agency and I worked as an advertising recruiter, which was amazing because I had a background in the industry. I had a lot of connections, a lot of contacts. I understood the rules really well because I'd been in advertising and in broadcast and in digital, and so it was like, wow, full circle moment for me. Again, it was 100% commission, I think. And I did really well. Again, But I knew that I needed more. There was something calling me to need more. And that's when I actually got the call from one of my clients at the time that I was recruiting for. They wanted me to come in-house into their really, really well-respected agency. They wanted me to become their head of HR, I should say. They never had anybody do that. There was like 200 people at the agency, and they'd never had someone in their HR role. They saw a lot of possibility in me, and they were right. And I was definitely someone who would be a great fit for that role. And they put a really beautiful salary in front of me. Really, really good. It was like 170K or something like that, 175. It was just like so out of this world from what I thought I could have. And at the time, I was also carrying debt. Okay, so that's also going to be something that I'm going to talk about in another episode. But I have had this sort of, I would call it actually disordered relationship with money, like you would have with food. I have glorified money. I have used money as a way to make myself look good, like wearing nice clothes and having nice things. And I've abused it in my lifetime and, have been in and out of debt, racked up credit cards, not paid taxes, got in trouble for that. There's a history here. And again, it's not who I am. This is why I want to do this podcast and why it has to be brutally honest, because so much of us think that that is who we are, and it's so shameful. And maybe some people in your life have told you like, oh, you're just so irresponsible with money. Okay. Or you are so bad at math. Same thing. Okay. None of that is true. It's not true that I'm irresponsible with money. But what is true is I have used money as a way to soothe. That's true because I never learned as a kid from my parents, who didn't learn from their parents, and et cetera, how to manage my big feelings like guilt, shame, fear, anger, jealousy, etc. Okay, so all that is, alcohol and money became the way for me to soothe. And truthfully, if I hadn't have overspent and I hadn't have drank, I don't know if I'd be here. It's the same thing with people who take drugs. On some level, it helped me survive, because I could not be with the feelings. So the price tag that they put in front of me was incredibly tempting. And my temptation got the best of me. And I took this job. And this is where things kind of get fun. When I got that job, I started to sit down. I sat down and I thought to myself, okay, well, what's the first thing you need to do as the head of HR, right? Human resources. Okay, it's about human beings. What's the first thing you need to do? And to me, it seemed obvious. Well, I need to sit down with every single person in this agency, all 200 of them, and get to know them as human beings and get to understand their pain, their shame, their trauma. At the same time, actually, I'd been doing some personal development work, which I'll tell you about in a second. So I was like, okay, well, it's a no-brainer. So I organized one-on-ones. I got to about 50 people, maybe a little higher. I was meeting 6 or 7 people for 1 hour every day. And I was listening to their stories. And I was hearing that some people were happy in their jobs and some people weren't. But then it was also like some people were happy in their homes and some people weren't. And some people were struggling with other things that were really personal to them. Body image issues, sex, men, women. Like it just became this life coaching session. Well, that wasn't exactly the mandate though. The mandate wasn't for me to come in and get to know people and help them in their careers and that kind of stuff. The mandate was more so about me coming in and writing policy books and safety stuff and all that typical human resources stuff, which really takes the human out of resources. No shame to them, like at all. I feel very privileged and very, 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 very grateful that I was invited into this company. And so basically what ended up happening is after 12 weeks, I was let go. Okay. They gave me a small severance and they said, all right, you got to go because what we had in mind isn't what you're doing, but there was no real hard feelings. Right. And that became the beginning of my life coaching career. Within a couple of days, I received some texts from some of the employees there asking me if I would be open to coaching them because they had really enjoyed some of the conversations we've been having and some of my insights, and they had found it to be very helpful. And they'd been, applying some of these, I guess it was advice, which, you don't really want to give people advice, but it was coaching, right? I was coaching them. And they were like, I'm applying these things and it's really, really helpful. So do you have like a rate or an hourly rate or something that I can pay you? And that's how a lot of this began. So I also want to take you back a couple of years before that. I was 33, so this is just over a decade ago. I had been really struggling in the romantic department. So basically my pattern was I would meet a guy, I would be super interested in him, really excited about the relationship, fall pretty hard for them pretty quickly, like planning the wedding, all that stuff, doodling their last name after mine. And then month 3 would hit. People would start to reveal, their true colors, or there would be an issue. And I would start to worry about the relationship, wonder whether I could trust this person. No, that was actually just a spotty, you got it. I wasn't always the most trustworthy. I kind of always had my eye out on what was going around with other people. Remember, it's not because of who I am. It's not because I'm a bad person. It's because as a little girl, right, I could not connect to my parents. I couldn't attach to them properly. So I ended up feeling very betrayed and then just turn on myself and betray myself all the time. And one of my values is integrity. But who wants to be integral when they feel like there's something wrong with them and there's something missing, right? You just end up sabotaging everything. So I had, not a lot of integrity, and I was not the most trustworthy person, and I would betray people emotionally. So I'd always have my eye kind of on other people, but I always thought that they were doing that, right? I always thought that people were like cheating on me. Oh my God. That is probably going to land and resonate for some of you. And if it does, don't be hard on yourself. It's been so helpful for me to identify that. I identified that in probably my late 30s, and stop doing that. Stop leaking sexual energy, right? And find out why you're doing it and get to the bottom, get to the core of the issue. Do some repair work there, okay? It will really fuck up your relationships. Spotty, you got it, as I always say, right? You think someone's doing something, it's always just a projection, right? So I was kind of having this pattern of I'd get in a relationship, things would go great for a little bit, first 3 months, and then it would be kind of difficult. And then I would start to get worried that they were cheating on me a little bit. I wouldn't often say that though. I would just start to have one foot out the door, right? And sex was very, performative for me. So not super enjoying the intimacy part. Can't get close to me anyway because my walls are all the way up because of, everything that I experienced as a little girl. And how independence for me was a way, and self-reliance was a way to stay connected to my parents. So hells to the no, wasn't going to let anybody get close to me. That's going to ruin my chances of getting close to my parents, Isn't that wild? I had these patterns going on in love and romance, and I'm 33 at this time. And a friend of mine who I'd been friends with since I was in grade 4, at the age of 9, guys, okay? She and I had, sort of come back together as friends. We had taken some time apart, in university and stuff, and I still know her to this day. She said to me, why don't you go and see my therapist? Her name is Shelley. And I took her up on the offer. And this was the first time I'd been to a therapist. This is the first time I'd done any of this type of work, any type of, deeper look into myself and my behaviors. And so I go to this session with Shelley, and I sit down, and the first thing she asked me was, tell me your story. What brings you here? What's going on? And can you include some of your childhood in that? And so I spent about 45 minutes talking. It felt like forever. And she's taken a bunch of notes. I swear to God, guys, there was a lot of notes. There was a lot of notes. I'm like, she's going to have to get a new notebook. Is her pen going to run out? She's taking all these notes. And at the end of that 45 minutes, there's a pause, and she's kind of, she's so warm and inviting and loving. And I feel like, I've just done a really good thing, and I've shared. And she asked me, Kathryn, do you know that you experienced quite a bit of childhood trauma? Wow, I just said that at 4444, which is really the theme of everything I've been doing the last, decade. That was a little insane. And there were 2 things that happened in that moment, guys. The first thing was that I finally felt like things made sense in that moment, because I'd always known that something was up. And I was like, wow, okay. So that was one thing that happened. The other thing that happened was that none of it made sense because what I described felt pretty darn normal. I was like, but what part? What part of my mom handing me over at 6 weeks to a babysitter who spanked me and put me in the corner every time I cried, or my dad threatening to kill my mom, or, my mom deciding to move me from one high school to another in the middle, which was really hard, or me cheating in university, or like my grandfather drowning, like what part of that was traumatic? I couldn't figure out which parts were. That's how amazing this is, right? So many people come to me and they're like, no, I had a really great childhood. And for the most part, people, it's like, it's not even that they experienced a lot of what the typical trauma looks like. It's more that their parents completely overrode their internal GPS, right? And they had to become performers and they were separated and fragmented from who they are. That's traumatic, okay? But many people also are like, oh, that's trauma? Your mom shipping you off to a babysitter at 6 weeks old until you were 10? And you not having a connection with her? Oh, interesting. Something you also need to hear, and you'll hear this in later episodes, is that not every kid will be impacted by the same things. 2 kids can experience divorce. One can come out completely unscathed. The other is completely devastated and needs to get a lot of support. Every soul is different. Some souls can handle more than others, okay? So it was eye-opening to have this first session, and she asked me to come back the next week, and I did, and I ended up starting to do the deep work, and I was 33 at the time. And so skip to, I'm in this new HR role. I think I'm like 37 or something. And I've done a bunch, quite a few years of my own personal development work now. And I realize that I'm seeing so many traumatized people and that I have a gift for seeing it and that I can hear it through what people say or don't say. I can see it in their eyes. I can see it through the shape of their body and the shapes that their bodies take. It's all super obvious to me. And I think that's a gift that I brought to this earth with me. And I also think it's because I experienced so much as a kid and was hyper vigilant and very observant. Okay. So that's what happened. Here I am, I'm doing my own work and I'm seeing it in all these other people. And I became very passionate about revealing to other people like what was going on with them, because I saw the results of seeing it and doing the work, and how it opened up a lot of freedom that I always yearned for and couldn't quite, ever get. Wow. So I decided I'm going to become a life coach because I had people asking me to do that. And that was really cool. I felt really like on fire, but I also was really in debt. I was like $100,000 in debt, credit card debt, and actually, no, it was probably more like 75 at the time. And so this was a huge risk to take, right? But your girl was so used to living in these, chaotic sort of energies in her body that it almost feels normal. I didn't know what it felt like to live in a relaxed body. I didn't know what it felt like to feel rest and safe and not buzzing all the time, right? And not living, like not always having to will myself through things, okay? So either way, I'm so grateful for all of it because I decided to start my own life coaching business in 2018, and it grew slowly. Like the first year, I don't even know, I might have made like 30 grand or something like that. From there, things just started to pop off. And with the onset of the pandemic, that was huge because everybody was kind of at home and had, extra money to spend. And they were seeing all their trauma. And so our industry really did boom at that time. That's not to say that coaching isn't still relevant and isn't still going to continue to grow. It is, but we've all had to figure out new ways marketing our businesses now because people aren't sitting around on Instagram like watching the way that they were then. If you didn't follow me back then, I made a pretty bold move. I was sharing services at the time because, I was carrying some debt. I wasn't making a lot of money. I was able to pay my rent and feed myself, basically. That was it. But come hell or high water, like I was going to make this work. I was going to make this work. I knew that I was very passionate about it. And so I could no longer afford to go to my Pilates studio at the time. If you were living in Toronto at the time, it was called Misfit. What an amazing studio. There was a little bit of drama to do with the Black Lives Matter movement at the time, and unfortunately the studio got shut down. But shout out to Amber and the Misfit family. They literally changed my life because Pilates had helped me get into my body. I hadn't even realized how out of body I was a lot. And this has been a big part of my work and the work now that, I do with my clients. I was so afraid to feel any pleasure in my body, any sensations at all, which is why sex also became very robotic for me. And I found this Pilates studio and I started going to it religiously. And it was a huge game changer for me. I fell in love with the people, the teachers, and who I became when I was on that mat. It was like I went to another world. I would cry. It was amazing. And then I could no longer afford the membership. So, like most scrappy solo entrepreneurs, we tend to be pretty creative and pretty resourceful. I asked them if I could trade services. So can I clean your bathroom and mop your floors, in exchange for classes? And they were super kind about that. They've been in that boat before. And they were like, yeah, of course. And it was December 2019 that I had this like a really strong feeling come over me when I was cleaning the studio. And it said, you have to get out of Toronto. You've got to get out of here. You've actually got to get out of Canada. You have to go to the United States, specifically Los Angeles. I was like, wow. Guys, when I say that this you hear people being like, oh my God, I got this strong intuitive ping. It was a strong intuitive ping, but it was like you can't not do this. You have to figure this out right away. It was so urgent. There was so much urgency to it. And I was like, geez Louise. And so I did. I started to put out the sort of vibe that I was looking to travel to LA, or I don't know, it was really just travel, because I was like, I don't know if I want to move to LA. That's kind of crazy. It's another country. And fast forward, I got an opportunity to take care of friends' dogs in LA for a couple of weeks and extended that trip a little bit. And then I just was like, I got to move here. Came back to Toronto in March of 2020, sold everything. I'd lived in the same house for 14 years, which was definitely by design, right? Never moved in with anybody, again, because I can't get close to people. So I picked partners who didn't want to live with me either. And there was always like, oh my God, we're breaking up again. And I'm never going to, all my friends are moving in with people. Why am I not? Well, because it was all done by design, Kathryn. And that house became this safe haven for me to hide out in. It definitely represented a smaller version of me. It was 400 square feet. He never raised my rent. Actually, he raised my rent once, from $1,000 to $1,500 in 14 years. This is insane. I remember when I was leaving the house, my parents were like, are you sure? You're so fortunate to have that kind of rent. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm in my late 30s. Who wants to live in a 400 square foot apartment? And I should be able to afford a lot more at this point, let's stop undermining my brilliance and my capability. So I ended up leaving and selling everything and moving to LA. And I was the last plane to arrive into LAX when the world was shutting down. And they said to me, are you sure you want to come in? There might be a chance you can't get back into your country because we don't know what's going on right now. And I said, yeah, I'm sure. And that's a bit of the rebel in me. I'm not a rebel. I don't ever want to label myself, and I don't want you guys to label yourselves either. And, you'll hear me say that a lot in these episodes as well. Don't let people put labels on you. When we talk about rigid patterns and aggressive patterns, it's not a label I put on myself or subscribe to. It's a way of making sense of my behavior, but I am not rigid. I am not aggressive. I'm a soul. Okay. And I'm beautiful and perfect, and everything is great. But it was interesting. I was like, yeah, sure. Heck yeah. I'm going to come in here and, oh, there's a global pandemic. I didn't know what was going on because I don't watch TV. So I was like, what? And it was all over the news. Right. So that was a really, really insanely cool time for me. And I'll sort of talk a little bit about what happened after that, but I want to do a whole episode on this separately. I ended up meeting somebody. His name is Chris. And we ended up getting married within the year and then getting divorced a year later. Okay. There's so much more to that story. All right. But I want to do a separate episode on it because I think it's really important, because I can see my part in all of it. I can see how I was playing out a pattern in the whole thing. And I have taken a lot of responsibility for that. I know that that's going to be a very impactful story for people. I think people are going to find themselves in that. And I'm going to do that for episode 3. Okay. My marriage and the end of my marriage and what ended up happening. So that brings me to now. I am in an amazing relationship with a man who I am so in love with. not only in like with, but like really in love with, because I've fallen in love with myself. It's really hard to love people when you don't love yourself. And I know people say that. And I always thought that that was a crock of shit. I was like, what does that even mean, Nancy? Well, it turns out that there's some truth to it. So today I'm in a wonderful relationship with a wonderful man, and he has trusted me to come in and to help nurture and raise his 2 girls because his wife passed away the year before we met. I do believe that on some level his late wife chose me. I do. But I believe that my soul was meant to go through all this. I never knew if I wanted to be a mom, and it makes a lot of sense now why I didn't want to be a mom. Not a lot of connection to my parents, and not a lot of connection to my body. To me, again, children were seen as an inconvenience. I always felt like an inconvenience growing up. So why would I want to have children and have dependents? It's fascinating once you see all this, guys. So I'm also going to do an episode on our family. I think that deserves its own episode as well. And I'll do that possibly for episode 4 or 5, because I think people want to hear all the behind the scenes. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this. My intention is to give you the psychology behind all of my behavior. I think that this is going to be a game changer for you and for the people in your life. By the way, I have one request. Nothing worse when you listen to something or you read something in a book. And by the way, I am definitely guilty of this. And then you turn to someone you love and you say, this is for you. I think you need to listen to this. This is you. Why that is difficult is because people need to come across things when it's the right time for them. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. You ever heard of that? And some of the insights that I share are more deep than where someone is able to go at this point because of the level of consciousness that they're at. So your level of consciousness, I want you to think of like an iceberg, right? So most of us are just at the tip, right? You're just seeing the tip above the water. You're on that cruise ship and you can just see the tip, right? And then as you start to do more of this work and you start to, ask deeper questions and go back in time a little bit and look at your upbringing and look at some of the behaviors and how it's all correlated, you go deeper into the water and deeper into the depths of the iceberg, right? And it's very layered. It's very layered. So some of the work that I share, because of how long I've been doing this and the amount of people I've worked with, it's close to 1,000 women at this point that I've impacted, which I feel very grateful for, both one-on-one group containers and through Instagram. Not everybody is ready to hear this stuff, okay? It might be too confronting for them. So just be really mindful and be really thoughtful when you think about sharing this with people and how you go about it. It's one thing to just say, hey, this is really neat. You might want to take a listen, right? It's another thing to say, hey, this is really neat. You might want to take a listen because I see you being very rigid and very aggressive. And I think that you have a lot of childhood trauma. And I can see that you're trying to escape a lot. That's another thing, right? Let people find their way themselves because sometimes they're not ready for it. And it just won't even add up. They're so on the defense, right? They're still trying to protect themselves that I don't want you to feel disappointed when you're like, oh my God, this is so great. And she has such a great way of delivering it. And oh my God, this is going to change the game for my family. And then the next thing you know, it doesn't matter if I have a great delivery, right? It's just, you got to meet people where they're at. But I do appreciate you sharing. I really do. And I also really appreciate you sharing if you got something from it. And if you grew at all, or if you saw something new for yourself, or, if this had an impact on you, or you got a little insight in it that like unlocked even the smallest little part of you. Okay. Thank you for listening. Do me a favor. Like this episode, give it 5 stars, share it, rate it, write a comment. It would mean the world to me. It means the world to us, content creators. We spend all this time doing this, and most people who are doing it, from their heart, we want more people to have access to it. And the more that it is rated and that it is viewed by others and shared, the more Spotify or YouTube or, Apple will push it to the top. Okay. This is some of the most important work that we will do, if not the most important work we will do in our lifetime. Understanding what's living beneath the surface, the subconscious mind. Thank you. I love you. And I will see you next time.